soda pop can man. Whoa. And I don't do well with pressure. Such a friendly gesture now. Just keep me out of the freezer. And don't give me a cold shoulder. 'Cause I am just a fragile can. Whoa. And you could crush me, crush me, crush me with your hand. So just tap me with your finger and I'll understand. So just tap me with your finger, I won't overflow again. I'm not who you think I am. Whoa. They call me soda pop can man. Whoa. 'Cause I don't do well with pressure. It's such a friendly gesture now. Just get me out of the freezer. And don't give me the cold shoulder. 'Cause I am just a fragile man. I'm a castle made of sand. Here comes the tide again to wash me out to sea again. I'm not who you think I am. Whoa. They call me soda pop can man. Whoa. 'Cause I don't do well with pressure. Such a friendly gesture now. Just keep me out of the freezer. And don't give me the cold shoulder. 'Cause I am just a fragile can. Whoa.
Oh, hi there. We are going to look at why the text of Daniel. Oh, let's look at that chart again I put up real quick, just to kind of get a mindset here. Let's see. Look at Sir Isaac Newton. Guy was an idiot. He's probably an Adventist. He thinks these solar reckoned years in symbolic apocalyptic prophecy aren't literal. What a fool. Doesn't he know that? Oh, wait. Notice he says 3 times and a half. That is for 1260 solar years. Solar years. Why does he say solar years? For a calendar year of 360 days. That's no solar year, Mr. Newton. Maybe his first name's Fig. And a day for a solar year. Why is he saying that? 360-day years are not solar years. Oh, that's because he's saying the days in the prophecy represent an actual year of time in actual history. That's your clue. The purely lunar reckoning of all the time periods of Daniel are not reckoned in the actual literal calendar that they use in real life. When Daniel wrote during the 70 weeks of Jesus, the prophecy of Jesus, about Jesus coming, they didn't use a 360-day year. What do you see in all the futurist charts? They try to make it work. Now none of them even have a starting date because they could never make it work. They tried. They're like a cheap version of their truth. There's only one that works, and we're going to look at that. It's Daniel, and it's the classic Protestant view. It's talking about Jesus. Now, Adventists affirm that it's Jesus and that he fulfilled the prophecy to make atonement for iniquity. according to the scriptures. I digress. Here's a little view of kind of the overview of history from creation to the future. Notice historicism in the orange box. We're claiming that these prophecies start with the decree of the Babylonian captivity, right, for Daniel, which is the head of gold, right? And it stretches all the way down to 1844 and beyond. If you look closer to the left in the orange box, that's preterism. It thinks everything's fulfilled right up until a little bit after the cross. They should be Catholics then. And then you look to the right outside of the orange box, the historicism covers, you see the futurism crams it all in at the end. You know what both this preterism, where it stops there by the cross, where it says Rome, and the futurists have in common? They were invented by Catholics who had pressure from the Protestants of talking about these prophecies encompassing the time period of the apostasy of the Roman Church, obscuring justification, righteousness by faith, meriting salvation through their traditions and imposed laws and changing of God's commandments. Like Paul predicted when he interpreted Daniel in 2 Thessalonians 2, that he said this apostasy had already started taking place. You can characterize it in many different ways, but we know that the leader of this is the man of sin who, making himself to be God, sits in the temple of God, blaspheming against God, like saying he can forgive your sins, or that you have to come through him and he speaks for God on earth because he's the Peter. He has the keys that Jesus gave Peter. Okay, so nobody acknowledges this anymore. It was the second pillar of the Reformation. It's why you believe justification by faith, because of that history. Adventists, how they're so bad, pointing that out, and believing in justification by faith, just like everybody else. Okay, so let's look at Daniel 8. Oh, one last thing here, just to be clear, just for fun here. Can't forget this.
Oh!
All babies do go to heaven, by the way. I don't care what the hardcore Calvinists say. He is going to be there, being cradled. Okay. I think you can believe God determines everything and still go to heaven. Okay, so here's the key points I want to try to keep in mind to follow this understanding. So it'll be like kind of an overview of what to be watching for. Oh, this is the wrong one. Whoops. My bad. Let me get the right one. Nope, that ain't it. Third time's a charm. Here we go. Is that it? Hope that's it. Nope. Okay, it's just got other slides in it. Sorry. Okay, so here's the things to kind of have in the back of your head. In Daniel 8 and 9, and in other places of Daniel, in the English, particularly the King James, I don't know of any translation that makes a distinction, actually, which is interesting. Well, if they did, they'd have to be Adventists, I suppose. The two terms in the Hebrew are kazon and mare, and they're both translated vision. In Daniel 8, I think verse 13, maybe, I forget, somewhere around there. Mare, vision, has been used 3 times, and the word mare appears for the first time in the text, and it's in that part, that first appearance of the word mare in the text It's not translated vision in the first appearance. It's translated appearance, the word appearance in English. The appearance of a man, the mare of a man who shows up in the middle of the vision, okay? Or in the middle of Daniel, the narrative of Daniel's vision, okay? Because it's a narrative of Daniel having a vision, and then it tells you the vision. So the first occurrence of the word mare is appearance. And then the next several times it's translated vision. But the first time it shows up, it's translated appearance. And of course, you wouldn't know in the English when it's kazon and when it's mare. And that ends up mattering, and you'll see why, and I'll show you why. But so just remember that. There's two words translated vision in the English, so you wouldn't know the difference in the English. The kazon vision is the greater context vision in Daniel 8, because it starts in the Persian period, and then it extends down. It's referred to as the kazon from the very beginning of the chapter, okay? But this is the claim I'm making here. It's going to be most associated with the 2300 days, which stretches down later into history. 3, we'll see that the kazon is not finished, or the end of it isn't until the time of the end. The mare is intrinsically tied as a part of the kazon. In other words, they are interrelated, obviously. They're not like totally separated. And it's a portion of it. That's what I want to show you. The mare vision is tied to the kazon and is a portion of it. The mare is the shorter time period and is actually the first portion of the kazon. In other words, it can be talking about the kazon or the mare, and they're the same. So in other words, the first portion of the kazon, which is the larger vision stretching a longer period of time, the mare is part of that, and it's the first part of it. We'll look at that. And the mare ends up being actually, in particular, the starting point of the greater context vision, dealing with the 2300 evenings and mornings. And it's actually that which is associated and is from the decree and the 70 weeks, okay? That's what I'm going to show. So, and one of the things which we can conclude from this is that the 2300 evenings and mornings, the kazon, is often associated with that part of the vision in Daniel 8, has to be a day for a year, because the 70 weeks, or the mare, we know is 490 years. And it's only a portion in the first part of the kazon. So whatever the 2300 evenings and mornings are, they must be equal to or longer than the 70 weeks, which is 490 years. Because a day is representative of a year consistently. Adventists didn't invent that. It was the majority view. So let's look at the text. Now remember, Daniel 8, at least I think it's some portion of chapter 1 through 7, is written in Aramaic in the original of Daniel, first 7 chapters. Part of the first chapter is Hebrew also. Starting in Daniel 8, through the rest of the book, it's written in Hebrew. Now, I believe Daniel put the whole book together, wrote the whole book of Daniel. But it's interesting to note. But chapter 7 is related, obviously, because chapter 2 sets the vision of Babylon through Rome. 7 is the same, different symbols. Daniel 8 starts in the second beast and focuses in on other things. But that sets the context. I'm not going to go over that. I'm just wanting to show the chapter 8 and chapter 9 and how those two terms are actually being understood, or how they should be understood as separate things, because they are two different words, have different contexts. Also, there is no chapter 8 and chapter 9 distinction in the original scroll of Daniel. So where chapter 8 starts, we have it going to the Hebrew language. So there is no chapter 8 ends and then chapter 9 is a separate thing. There's no chapter breaks in the original. So it's easy to talk about Daniel 8 and chapter, because we break up Daniel into the chapters to break it into pieces, but there's no real original break there per se, right, in the narrative of the original writings. There's no separation in that sense. Or you can make a case for that in some other way, but I'll explain why they're obviously connected and how there's no original break there, which can kind of make it easier to miss how the two are connected. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Again, I'm not a scholar. I'm just interested in this stuff. So I say stuff weird or whatever. That's okay. So I'm going to read it. I'm going to take this kind of slow, but so as I read it, I'm going to note where the term vision is used. And then we're going to go back and look at these terms. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, even unto me, Daniel, after which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and I was by the river Eli. We have vision again, I think they're right. Then I lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before me the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. If you're not familiar with this, it's going through the kingdoms, Medo-Persia, the Medes and the Persians, and then the Persians being the larger horn. And then it's talking about the goat, which is Alexander the Great. The Greece Empire ends up taking over them, spanning hundreds of years of time. These are the symbols, which have already been laid out in other forms. Okay, but this vision starts out in the Persian period, not with the Babylonian period, right? So maybe I won't read it all. I'll just kind of skip to the point here. So we have those. He's getting the vision. Wax great even to the host of heaven. So here, it's just showing where all the terms vision are through this, or where the term vision is translated here through this chapter 8. This is where it gets interesting in this chapter 14, verse 14, 15. So notice the word vision is here. So we have the word appearance. That's mare. This is the first time the word mare shows up in the text. Some of the terms, the translation of vision is mare or kazon now. Before, every time vision, I think that's the 5th time it's come up, it says kazon. The first time we get the term mare is right here, and it's a translated appearance of a man. So Gabriel is the one, he's having this vision, who's giving this vision. And then suddenly there's the appearance of a man, mare of a man. Okay, and vision is right here. It talks about the vision and vision again. Okay, talking about the vision. He's asking about the vision. The man's telling Gabriel to tell him about the vision. And then the last 2 verses here of the chapter 8. These are not the same word. So now let's look at, and we have vision again. Okay, so we know this. I already told you this. The 2 Hebrew words translated vision, mare and kadzon. I'm just gonna color code them so they stand out. Quick overview. Oh, I guess that got messed up. Oh, okay, yeah, we're looking at where these different terms are used. Kadzon. So the first 3 occurrences of kadzon translated vision, verses 1 and 2. So he's having this vision. He's having this kadzon appeared unto me. Starts out in Persia, by the river. Kadzon, right? Next, verse 13, another occurrence. So there's these 2 angels, and he's told about the daily sacrifice. By reason of transgression, it cast down the truth to the ground and practiced and prospered. And then he saw the 2 people speaking, one saying to the other, angel, whatever, how long shall the kadzon? So everything about this so far is the kadzon, right? About the daily sacrifice being taken away. It's actually daily. The word sacrifice is in the original text. We can come back to that later. But okay, and then verse 15, we have this new word here. Notice. And he's asking, how long till the 2,300 evenings and mornings or days in the King James? It's evening, morning, Arab Boker. How long? So he wants to know, right? So the sanctuary is going to be trampled. Now remember, Daniel is in captivity. he has got no word about going back to the land. He knows the temple's been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and they're still in captivity. And he's getting a vision about the daily being taken away, and the sanctuary. But there is no sanctuary. So imagine what is he thinking, right? They don't even have a sanctuary right now. And now Daniel says, and it came to pass when I, even Daniel, had seen the cause zone and sought for the meaning. Then it says, then stood before me as the mare of a man. Notice this. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Uli, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the mare, vision. See, now if you didn't see that, if you didn't know mare was a different term, you'd think it was saying the same thing as up here. I had seen the vision. And then there's this mare of a man. He shows up, and this man is telling Gabriel, he's bossing Gabriel around. Imagine that. He tells Gabriel, no, Daniel's asking about this cause zone. And then it says, a man appears, another person comes. And the mare, it's the appearance of this man, the term mare. Daniel asked about it, and then Daniel's asking about cause zone, which is what's been associated with everything explained up to this point. And then there's this mare of a man. Daniel's asked about that vision, cause zone. And this man who shows up associated with the mare says, no, Gabriel, make this guy understand the mare. Well, as we know, that term shows up, the mare of a man, and then he says, make him understand the mare. So we don't know much about it yet. But you wouldn't know that. So this is something different than the cause zone he's asking about. How do I know that? Let's see. So this guy bosses Gabriel around, says, no, make him understand the mare, which we don't even have. What's the mare part? So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid, fell on my face. And he said to me, understand, O man, that at the time of the end shall be the cause zone. He's asking about the sanctuary, because he just told he asked how long. Or he said unto me, into 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. What sanctuary? We don't have a sanctuary. So now Daniel wants to know, what's this all about? So explain this vision to me, the cause zone. But a man shows up, and he has the mare. It's the mare of a man. And that man tells Gabriel, make him understand the mare. He's not, and in case you're wondering, the mare isn't the explanation of the cause zone, because he says, no, the cause zone is for the time of the end. Okay, then, oh man, it's not in here, but now, the mare of the evenings and the mornings. Well, I thought the cause zone was the evenings and the mornings. Yes, the mare is, this is why the mare is the first portion of the cause zone. Because the cause zone has to do with the end of the 2,300 days. And that's when the sanctuary is cleansed. It's looking to the end of that. The mare is part of the cause zone vision. It's the first part. That's why it's of the evenings and mornings. So the mare is of the overall vision, right? But he says, how do we know that's not talking about the same vision, which you could kind of think that at the first glance? It'd be like, you would say like, let's see, you would say the first days of the week. It's like something like that, or the first, it's like a portion of a greater whole. Like you would say the cool of the day is a portion of the day, because they are intertwined with each other. But the cause zone is for the time of the end, and it was associated with when the sanctuary is cleansed after 2,300 evening mornings. Then shall it be cleansed. So he asked about when that is. He said, no, tell him about the mare of the cause zone, because that's going to give us our starting point for the whole vision. The mare is the first part of it. But shut up the cause zone, which is the end of the time period, for it shall be for many days. And then the last thing in chapter 8 here we have, so Daniel says, and I Daniel fainted, was sick certain days. Afterward, I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the mare, this appearance of a man, but none understood it. I wish I had that other slide in here. Hopefully that's in the next part here. He explains more about the vision of the symbols of the goat and the succession of kingdoms, because that is the first part of the Qad zone, which is the mare from the decree, the Persian period, which is where we start in Daniel 8. That leads up to it, but he still doesn't have it all put together, right? Because he's thinking he hasn't gotten word about the temple being rebuilt yet. He hasn't even gotten word on that yet. So he's like, think about it. He's still in captivity. So he's confused. He's wondering about this Qad zone, this whole vision, and the guy's saying about the mare, and he starts telling him about the time period from Persia onward, which is where he's at in history. So he knows that, but that's basically the same thing as the Qad zone, the first part of it, right? So he still doesn't have it all put together in his head. So he's saying he didn't understand it, but he's being told to understand the mare. And he knows it's associated with the temple, but they don't have a temple yet. So this makes a lot of sense when you consider what the next chapter is. That's just an overview of where that is. So chapter 9. So he goes to pray about, he realizes the 70 years are almost up that Jeremiah prophesied about how long they'd be in captivity. So now he's like, I got to get the people back to the land. So he starts praying about restoration of Jerusalem because God had made promises. He's repenting for the people because he wants to go back to the land, back to the temple, because he's got this prophecy about the temple and it being trampled and whatever. He doesn't know much about it, right? He doesn't understand it. So he's praying about it because he knows he's talking about a temple, which would have to be built. So he's praying about it. And we know, if you're familiar with chapter 9, you can see that Gabriel shows up, because he's praying about it, to give him the good news about going back to the land. I'm just giving a quick overview of that. So 21. So he's praying about that. Then we get to chapter 21. Gabriel shows up from he was earlier in chapter 8. That's who was there at the other vision, these Qad zone and mare thing. A vision there, Qad zone, whom I had seen in the Qad zone, showed up at the beginning of chapter 8, caused a fly switch to test me about the time of the evening oblation, and he informed me and talked with me. He said, "O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding." Remember how chapter 8 ends. He didn't understand it. He was sick and he didn't understand the vision, but had been started to be explained to him that the mare part of it, right? The mare was being understood, but that the Qad zone was for the time of the end. So then Gabriel shows back up after this prayer. The same guy that was there at the Qad zone. At the beginning of thy supplications, this is Gabriel. The commandment came forth, and I came to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore understand the matter and consider the mare, which is what the mare of a man said, make him understand the mare. Now here he is showing up to make him understand because he didn't understand it. So he said, now consider the mare. I come to make you have understanding. Then we have the 70 weeks prophecy, which the word vision in the prophecy here, and seals up the Qad zone. This is a necessarily thing that has to happen historically before the Qad zone can happen, which is dealing with how long until the sanctuary would be trampled up until for 2,300 days. So the mare is the 70 weeks, which gives us the starting point because it's the first part of the Qad zone. Because isn't it kind of conspicuous that the 2,300, there's no starting point given unless you understand that the mare is of the Qad zone, of the evening and mornings, the end of the 2,300. So this gives you a starting point. And this has to happen. And this seals up the Qad zone, the prophecy of the Qad zone, the cleansing of the sanctuary. So it's what we see here is the mare has to be shorter than the Qad zone. Qad zone is for the time of the end. The time of the end is what we see at the end of chapter 11 in Daniel. And then the same figure from Daniel 8 spoken of is the same figure in Daniel 11, which is the little horn, which is the same thing from Daniel 7. So here, I can show you one other thing here. I got to share my screen regarding the time of the end. Once you realize Daniel 2 lays out the pattern of the sweep of history, and you see the connections between Daniel 2 and 7:8, the figure in Daniel 8 is almost all interpreters are going to point out that whoever is in view in the chapter 8 is in chapter 11. Chapter 11 goes into chapter 12, and it's clearly talking about that one who's destroyed at Christ's coming in 2 Thessalonians 2. Not to mention, in Daniel 2, we have the rock that strikes the feet of the statue, and it grows and fills the whole earth, an everlasting kingdom, which is cut out without hands. The mountain that strikes the feet is cut out without hands. Well, what destroys the little horn in Daniel 8? He is taken out without hands. Also, okay, let me pull this up. Try to show this a little clearer. It's a quick little, oh no. Try again. There we go. That sucks. It's not going to let me do it. Let's try that one more time. Weird. That's not good. Okay. I'll try it this way. I think that one of the key things to consider is that verse 15 in chapter 8. Who do you think that man is that's telling Gabriel what's up? The appearance of a man, the mare of a man. And then the mare is associated with what he's supposed to be. He's told like twice that the thing is the vision associated with the 2300 was for the time of the end, or not until many days in the future, Daniel. And then he says, but make him understand the mare. And we know that that's associated with the temple, which Daniel knows nothing about when he's receiving the vision. So when he prays in chapter 9 about restoration of Israel, think about being Daniel, like, there is no temple. What do you mean the temple will be trampled underfoot? We don't even have a temple. So now he's praying about it because he knows there's something going on with the temple coming up, in the vision he's having. And it says he doesn't understand the vision, the mare. And then he starts praying about having the temple back and going back to the land. And Gabriel gives him the prophecy about going back to Jerusalem in the 70 weeks, which is the explanation which I've come to tell you about the mare. And then he gets the 70-week prophecy. And we know that the mare is of the evenings and mornings, but that the cod zone isn't until the time of the end. So the mare has to be the first portion of it, and that gives you the starting date for the entire vision. And the vision of Daniel's 70 weeks seals up the cod zone vision. That's that word vision there. It's the cod zone. And the explanation of the mare, which is not the explanation of the cod zone, which Daniel asked about, but this man who's the mare of a man shows up and tells Gabriel, no, tell him this. Who bosses around Gabriel? That's Jesus. And of course, the mare vision is the prophecy of Messiah coming, which gives us a starting point for the whole thing. And we know that the 2300 has to be after. The cleansing of the sanctuary has to happen after there's a sanctuary. And the sanctuary that gets built happens in the 70 weeks. But guess what? That gets destroyed before, that is about Jesus coming and putting an end to the sacrifices. So the temple doesn't have any use after that, after Jesus confirms the covenant. But yet the cleansing of the sanctuary is for the time of the end. So although Daniel would be thinking, okay, this has to do with the temple that's going to be rebuilt before Jesus shows up, he gets that answer, and we know that has to happen, right? 70 weeks are determined for that people in the holy city, and the temple has to be built because of other prophecies too. And then Jesus ends up showing up before the second temple is destroyed because the glory of the temple has to be greater. But then the temple's destroyed, so the Messiah has to come before the temple's destroyed. And he did. And he is the true temple. So whatever the cleansing of the sanctuary has to happen after that, the end of it, the time of the end. See, the time of the end, you tell Daniel that, and then you give him the vision of the Mare, which is the next thing to happen. That means the 2300, or the end of the 2300, has to be after what was to occur in the Mare, which is the 70 weeks. And that was plain, as you can see. I've come to give the understanding and show you the Mare. And then you get the 70 weeks prophecy, which seals up the Cod zone. Unless you think the time of the end was before Jesus even was born and it was Antiochus Epiphanes. I don't know how that could ever make any sense. Chapter 9 is explaining things that Daniel would have been wondering about in chapter 8, from chapter 8. And it is the explanation, which totally obliterates Antiochus, for one. And if you know that the Jesus is the one in Daniel 9:27, the Adventist view, for anybody holding, being honest with the text in Daniel 11 into Daniel 12 regarding the time of the end, and the destruction of the figure in Daniel 11, which is clearly the same figure in Daniel 8, which is the little horn, which is clearly the same figure of Daniel 7, which is laid out in Daniel 2. Your only option is if you understand that the futurists are literally robbing Christ of the 70th week and saying it's Satan. But so the only way you can understand that it's the Antichrist that Paul's in 2 Thessalonians 2 is getting from Daniel. And by the way, you know what that means? That means Paul has no problem taking a figure amongst temple language, old covenant language from Daniel 7, because the new covenant hasn't come yet. He's taking that figure who seems to be involved with, a trampling of the sanctuary or abomination of desolation ideas regarding the temple. Paul has no problem associating that to the one that Christians are to watch out for after the new covenant's been installed. So if you understand that temple isn't coming back to do sacrifices, and dispensationalism is obviously wrong, if you know that, this is the only viable view. And it means there is a heavenly sanctuary because the Bible tells you that in the book of Hebrews and all over the place. The one on earth was patterned after the one in heaven, and Jesus is ministering from the one in heaven. And the plan of salvation in its fullness is what Christ has brought to all the nations, to get all the nations back from the foundation of the world. But no, there's a 2,000-year gap in the apocalyptic prophecy, which is the revealing of the Messiah and the salvation of the world, the pinnacle of time and space. And no, Daniel 8 is about the temple, and then the future is about bringing the temple back, and there's nothing in there about the new covenant and all the Protestant Reformation and all the trampling of the saints and being drunk on the blood of the saints and the Pope speaking for God as though he could when he can't, and killing everybody and totally obscuring justification and righteousness by faith. And you got a dedication against Adventists, and you call yourself a Protestant. You make me sick. Adventists are bad. And they're like the one people pointing to the reality of history and the truth of Protestantism. And you say we're not even saved because you say we don't believe in justification by faith. I'm speaking toward answering Adventism. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. Go read the comment page. I listened to this. He had a live stream. I missed it. I didn't know he was going to have it, but I saw it. And this kid tries to come in there, and he gives him the classic, what is the gospel? Romans 2, Galatians, we're saved by grace through faith, not of yourself, lest any man should boast. It's a gift of God. That Christ died and was buried according to the scriptures. No, that's not the gospel. Dude, if some Presbyterian had gone in there and quoted those verses, he would have been like, yeah, it's the gospel, brother. And Adventist goes in there, gives the basic gospel. Oh, that's not the gospel. That's just Jesus dying according to the scriptures. It's like, and then someone else comes in and then he pigeonholes him with some document he made as if Adventists say you have to believe all these 7 things to be saved, as though Adventists think people didn't have the gospel throughout history, or that like you can't be saved unless you've believed all these things. And so therefore Adventists are saying nobody was saved. That's total BS. It's totally not true. And by the way, I was taught to the Adventists, our official documents say this. Ellen White said this. So take your pick. It doesn't really care. It's what it should matter is, what do Adventists teach now, and what do they actually believe, and what are they teaching, and what's in their official documents. But if we must go and look at what Ellen White says, since you use that, even though that's not my rule of faith, the Bible is, and you should be concerned about what Adventists are teaching. That is, we believe in justification by faith, righteousness by faith. It's you're justified through the imputed merits of Christ only. You cannot merit justification. Sanctification flows out of the imparted righteousness in an abiding relationship with Christ. And that is imparted. Christ's righteousness is imparted to you through that initial justification of imputed righteousness. It's like Wesleyan theology. It's actually the only theology that really makes any sense. If you walk away, if you stop trusting, you aren't saved, because that's what differentiates the saved from the lost: those who trust in Christ and those who do not. You have free will, so you are obliged to abide, and that's the power of God and the Holy Spirit. You're saved and justified and made right before God when you trust Christ and his merits. So the moment you do that, you're justified, and if you die right then, you go to heaven. And that is a process through the ministry from the moment you're justified until the end. God is working in your life if you're abiding in him. That's sanctification. That's imparted righteousness. It's a process, but that's not salvation. That's not justification. That's what Adventists teach. That's what Ellen White said. That's what we teach. That's what the official documents say. Nobody says the gospel is the health message. I mean, you can say like all the teachings are revealed present truth, because they are, because you are the temple of God. And why wouldn't God reveal that truth? You should take care of your body. You should respect your body. You should understand that his ways in the sanctuary and what that represented. We should have fuller understanding about the work of salvation through history. We should go back to the commandments and put God as our authority, not the church, which thinks it can change God's law and his authority. And that's developed out of Reformed law, gospel distinctions, and the threefold division of the law. Adventists basically took that and then said, we ought to be consistent with this, which they weren't at first, because they weren't keeping the Sabbath. But when someone showed them truth, they accepted truth and they took it on. That's a good thing. This is so funny to me. Oh, look, they didn't even have the truth. Oh, that means they're false. No. Well, what? Do you think your church is infallible? Is it a bad thing that somebody said, hey, look at this truth, you guys aren't following it? And they say, hey, she's right. That is a good thing. That's actually evidence that they're humble and open and seeking. Sounds like the kind of people God might actually use for a message for the last time. And by the way, a Baptist guy came up with Jesus coming back in 1844. That doesn't, also, by the way, the many futurists like Robert Breaker, who's very popular still, he blatantly predicted Christ would return. Does that falsify futurism, or evangelicalism, or dispensationalism as a whole? No. It means they were wrong about that one doctrine, that is that Jesus would return in 1844. That doesn't undermine the principle that was used, that's consistent in the interpretation. The days equaling years have to be the case, because it's the only way you can make Daniel 7 make any sense with the papacy. So unless you want to abandon that from Ignatius Loyola, basically futurism, I think God actually has a consistent hermeneutic in the apocalyptic literature, so it's consistent in its interpretation. It didn't leave out the whole period of the new covenant after Jesus brings salvation, as if Satan wouldn't be wrath with the woman and go to make war with the remnant of the seed. After, in Revelation 12, Christ is assumed up into heaven and bought salvation. That's when the dragon goes after the people. And she escapes into the wilderness. And we know that's Rome trying to snatch Jesus when he's born. That's sweeping through history from the fall all the way to the end in Revelation 12. Right after Jesus is taken up into heaven, who's born of a virgin and is to rule with a rod of iron, is taken up into heaven. Then it talks about the 1260, which are years, because 1260 is a lunar rendering of 3.5 years. And the Jews don't use a lunar calendar. So you can't say it's literal, because literal would mean they were using a lunar calendar, and they don't. By the way, a lunar calendar, you can see it in my other videos. Also, it can't be literal because we know they have a lunisolar calendar according to the Bible, according to logic, according to actual history. The Passover has to be in the spring. Therefore, they have to add a 13th month to keep the year in step with the seasons. And the Bible tells you that. And so if the time periods are supposed to be literal, they wouldn't be purely lunar renderings. And by the way, if it's literally 42 months, there's no such thing as 42 months in a 3.5 year period, no matter where you start, ever. It's impossible because you have 13-month years every third year or sooner. So no matter where you start, a 3.5 year period started on any day of any month in any year from Daniel's time through until even to today. You'll never get 1260 in 3.5 years, no matter where you start. It's impossible. And no matter where you start, you cannot get 42 months in 3.5 years. It's impossible. You have to have at least 43 or 44 months. That's another reason you know it's not literal. Because if it was literal, then the 1260 days, which is the 42 months, which is the times and half a time, they are the same period incrementally. So it can't be literal. The type of calendar, and we know that because if it's literal, it's saying a literal time period in actual history, but we know no time period from that time, because it'd be the first 69 weeks too. From the decree, you count years, which by the way is very smart, because all these calculations people try to do by converting the year to 360-day years, no, it was for the Jews into actual time. So when the decree came and they were counting, they would know when the Messiah would come. After the 69th week, the Messiah shows up. And it says in Luke 3, it's very obvious that they were in expectation because they knew the prophecy. That's why they thought John the Baptist. That's why it says they were in expectation. It's why when Jesus called them, they were waiting to see who was the Messiah. They knew that Messiah was coming. So when he came and he called them and they heard what John said, the Lamb of God, they just followed him instantly because they were expecting the Messiah based on Daniel. So we know they know how to count years. There's only one decree that goes from that decree to that time, 27 AD. And it's when you understand how you would count years, it's exactly on point. And we know that the Shemitah cycle and the sabbatical cycles or the Jubilee cycles are still based off of that rendering from that decree, 457 every 7 years. It'd be like 2001 now, 1994, going all the way back to 457. And 31 AD would be exactly in the middle of that Shemitah cycle, that sabbatical cycle. And 34 would be the end of the 10th Jubilee from that decree. 10 Jubilees from 457 to when right around Stephen died, or 3.5 years after Jesus died, 34 AD, which we see a little speech at Stephen's death. He basically does like a prophetic indictment of them. And they gnash their teeth and they stone him, and he sees a vision of Jesus coming. At the end of the 10th Jubilee from that decree date. So when it says after 62 weeks, which is after the 7, they're thinking in, you go to Leviticus 25, it's the last thing I'm going to say. If you go to Leviticus 25, it lays out this thing with these 7-year cycles. So when it talks about a week, they're thinking in units of 7 years. So when it says after 62 units of 7 years. So when it says after the 62, that means the 7-year periods, 49 years, by the way, that first 7 is a jubilee, the first jubilee of the 10 of the 490 years. You can't break those up. They're continuous. 70 weeks, 70 sabbatical cycles are determined. It's a limit. There's no break in there. Jesus has to, because we know that Jesus' death is what confirms the covenant. What makes atonement for iniquity was his death, because that ratifies the covenant. That's what brings salvation. Don't you believe that? God said 70 weeks, or by the way, are cut off. 70 weeks are the mare, which are cut off. Cut off of what? Cut off from, it's katak. That's the only time it's in the Hebrew Bible. When you look that up in the Mishnah, you can find about 8 renderings, 8 or 9 renderings, 8 of the 9 times. When you look at what katak means, it's like if they cut off a portion of something from a larger thing, like the end of something, or it's determined as a fine translation, because that's what it's saying. It's saying this portion of a time period is cut off for the Jews. So the mare is cut off from the Kazon, in other words, from 2,300 years. This is going to be cut off, a time limit for them to come into the covenant of Christ, God's full plan of salvation. It's cut off. Cut off from what? So it's taken as a portion to do something. 70 weeks. So what brings in reconciliation for iniquity or atonement for iniquity, because it's Kippur, like a day of atonement, Yom Kippur, that sort of thing. That's what it says. Put an end to sin, all the things that Jesus does by his death. That has to happen in the 70 weeks that are cut off to fulfill those 6 things. If you put that gap in there and he's cut off after the 62, which that means he's after the first 7, the first Jubilee, and then from the first Jubilee till the last 7 years, the last 7 of the 77s, which is the last 7 of the 10th Jubilee, the last 7 years, that last unit of 7, that's when Jesus shows up. Because he says from the decree after to the set, the end of the 69th, that's when Messiah shows up. That's when Jesus showed up. Sometime after the 62, or in other words, after he has shown up, he'll be cut off after the 62. After the 7 and the 62 units of 7 years are done, after those. So you can't, there's no even a crack to try to say, well, it was in the 69, inside the 69. No, after 7 sevens and 62 sevens, after the 7-year periods, 7 of them, which is 1 Jubilee, and then 62 after those periods of 7. It's very clear. He dies, he's cut off sometime. It doesn't tell you exactly when, just sometime after that. So 69 weeks of years, or 69 sabbatical cycles, have come and gone. Sometime after that, Messiah dies. Well, we know that it's Messiah dying that fulfills the things in Daniel according to the scriptures. So if you say that wasn't the 70th week, then you're saying Jesus' death was outside of the allotted time period. But making reconciliation for iniquity has to happen in the allotted time period. That's why God gives a time period. It's the purpose. That's why there's a decree with a starting point. You can't just put gaps in there. It doesn't cut them up randomly so you can throw in gaps. It's giving you increments to show you what it's based on. The context to the original audience is sabbatical cycles. The first 7 is simply telling you, like, you could say it's the first Jubilee. Some people have said it's to rebuild the temple. I don't know. I don't think that's exactly it. I think it's just saying, look, these 7 sevens is a Jubilee. I'm giving it to you in 70 sabbatical cycles, or 7-year periods, where they make the land rest every 7th year. And then every 7 of those is a Jubilee. So the first 7 is just breaking up in those increments, 7 sevens, a Jubilee. And then from the end of the first Jubilee to the beginning of the last sabbatical cycle of the 10 Jubilees, or 70 sabbatical cycles, is when the Messiah shows up. So there's this last 7 years that he's going to confirm that covenant. What covenant? The promised covenant. Think about Jeremiah 31:31. It's quoted in the New Testament. Jesus did this. He made the sacrifice end because he is the sacrifice. And he came to finish that work in the last 7 of those 77s. But he's cut off in the middle of the one. But guess what? That's what actually makes the covenant. It actually ratifies it and brings in the new covenant. That's the revealing. That's the mystery. His death brings that new covenant and salvation to the world. That's why it's like, but he's cut off in the middle of the 7. But I thought he's going to be confirming it for the whole week. No, it's not about that. It's about the last sabbatical cycle. The Messiah shows up to teach them, but he gets cut off in the middle of it. But guess what? That's what actually ratifies the covenant and brings salvation to the nations. So he doesn't have to keep going. That is what brings salvation, is his death. And that's what's revealed, the mystery. And that 70 comes after 69. Otherwise, you put his death and he fails the prophecy. And there is no salvation, because salvation is to the Jew first. That's why Jesus only came to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, because he was confirming that covenant promise to thy people, thy holy city. He keeps his word. It's not that his message wasn't for the whole world, which people try to use that verse to say that. No, because he comes to the Jew first, but then it will go to everyone else. And he's focused on his people because he made a promise to the fathers. And then they end up killing him, and that confirms the covenant, and then it goes to the world. That's why Paul is called shortly after Stephen's death, because Stephen's death is when the 70th week ends, and the time period promised to bring, because he even gave him mercy even after he died. But guess what? He established the new covenant and the church with the first covenant people. The church is Jewish, if you will. The covenant made was the covenant promised to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And he did that. And all the people that established the church were Jews. It's a Jewish church. Replacement theology is saying the new covenant is for Gentiles, and he's going to deal with Israel later. No, the church is for the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and you are grafted in. Some of them were cut off and can be easily grafted back in, so don't boast. But it was still established with first covenant believers. The nation didn't accept him, but who cares? Jesus will establish that when he returns. And you better be ready for him when he comes, because that's what he said. The door won't be open forever. It says before he returns, there is probation, and the door shuts, because when he comes, his reward is with him. There is no second chances after Jesus comes back. Jesus says, "Watch ye therefore, for you know not when he comes, lest that day take you like a thief in the night." And then people will be like, "Lord, Lord, let me in." Or, "Oh, we better go buy oil." And they'll go out and they'll try to get more oil. And then they'll come back and the door will be shut in their face. That's what Jesus said. I know that's harsh. I don't care what your view is, but if you say, "Oh, well, you can, the Antichrist and Jesus, then you have a chance and you can be saved after Jesus comes." No. Jesus over and over and over. Don't let that day take you like a thief. They'll be eating and drinking, giving in marriage, and then bam. It's never rained before. Yeah, all things go on as they did from the beginning. The fathers fell asleep. Eating and drinking, giving in marriage, till the flood came and swept them all away. And the Son of Man will send forth his angels to gather up all that doesn't belong in the kingdom, to be put into a barn and burned. When Christ comes, one will be taken, one left. The one taken is like in the flood. They'll be taken away. That is the resurrection. When they see Jesus coming, if they're not ready, they're going to mourn. They're going to say, "Make the rocks fall on us and hide us from the judge, from the Lamb, the wrath of the Lamb, he who sits on the throne." And then the people that are ready, because they've made themselves ready through the blood of the Lamb, will say, "Lo, this is our God. We have waited for him. He will save us. So be ready." All the other stuff is nonsense. God bless the Seventh-day Adventist Church because they're right.